So if you've been following along with the Make Your First Quilt series, it's time to turn your quilt top into a finished quilt. Welcome to Epida Studio. My name is Elizabeth and I help you make beautiful things with quilting, bojagi, and embroidery. So if this is your very first project and you're brand new to quilting, you might have thought that by the time you did all the patchwork, you're done the project. And now, surprise, there's actually a lot more things you need to do to be able to finish it into a final quilt. So this piece that we've completed is called a quilt top, or sometimes called a flimsy. There's some different nicknames people give it. But as we can see, this is just, it looks pretty on one side, and the other side has all these raw edges and stuff. And so we want to finish it. And to do that, we're going to put it together into what we call a quilt sandwich. So we're going to have some kind of batting in the middle. So this is some kind of fluffy, kind of soft, but a bit thick material. And then we're going to have other fabric that goes on the back. And then we're going to hold those three layers together. So there are a lot of different options and different ways you can proceed at this point. So I'm going to mention a couple of them. If you want more details, I do have another video that talks about in specific the details and the pros and cons of each of these options. But I'm just going to mention them quickly and I'm going to tell you which one I recommend for your first quilt project. So your quilt top, your flimsy that you have, is probably either 5 blocks by 7 blocks or 6 blocks by 6 blocks. It's one of those sizes, or maybe you decided to make 2 smaller quilts, or you just made like 3 by 4 block quilts. Whatever size you have is going to work with what I'm telling you. However, you might be looking at it and thinking, wow, I have a queen size bed, and so I can easily make more blocks and make this way bigger so that it can fit my bed. And if this is your first project, I don't recommend you do that, just because if you get much bigger than this, it's going to be very awkward to finish it yourself in the method that I'm going to explain. So I would recommend keep this one with your 35 or 36 blocks or less, and just treat this one as a learning quilt, as a practice quilt. And then if you want to go on and make a big queen size quilt, you can go on and do that. But big quilts, when you're finishing themselves, they get very unruly, and so I don't recommend that as a first project. Once you've done something and you know where you're going, then you can for sure make a big one, and you'll have an idea of what you're doing and what your options are. So to finish this quilt, there are a few different options I'm going to highlight really quickly. The easiest option, obviously, is to pay somebody else to do the quilting for you. There are people called long arm quilters, and if you take your quilt top, they will put it with a batting and with a backing, and they will do all the stitching for you on a big machine. You can see my video if you're curious to see what a long arm quilting machine looks like. So that's fine. That's a good option. However, if this is your very first quilt and you're just getting into quilting, that is a really expensive way to do it. So if money's not really an option and you're thinking, yeah, I don't want to have to worry about this, I just want to do the patchwork part of it, then go ahead and do it. But for a lot of people, that can be a turnoff to think, I have to pay this much money on every single project. And so I'm going to show you a way that you can quickly and easily finish this on your home machine by yourself. And so there are a few different ways you can do that. One is called free motion quilting, and that is a skill that does need a lot of practice, and that involves disabling the feed dogs on your machine, and then you are driving it through your machine. And there are a lot of beautiful results that you can do. You can look up thousands of videos about free motion quilting. However, for your first project, I don't recommend it. For your first project, I recommend what I call simple quilting, and we are just going to do the quilting just with lines of sewing on our sewing machine. And so I'm going to do a full tutorial with more details, but just so you know, that's where we're going with that. Another option that some people like is called tying, and that is often used with a much fluffier batting, so your piece is much more squishy, and that means you make your sandwich, and then instead of having stitching lines holding it together, you just have little pieces. Either you can tie with yarn or string, or you can do little stitches on your sewing machine, but just in little spots, it attaches the layers together. That is also, it's an okay option. I'm not going to be including that in the tutorial, just because there are some things that are difficult with that. And so if you want to try that, for sure you can look up other tutorials to try that. And then the last option is hand quilting. So this is having the 3 layers and then stitching by hand of the layers together. And I don't recommend that for your first project, just because it's very time consuming. And if this is your first quilt, you probably by now are just getting really excited and you want to get it done and be able to use it. And hand quilting can be very relaxing, can be very meditative, but it is time consuming. So if you're interested in hand quilting, then for sure go and try it, but just realize that obviously it's going to take a lot more to sew by hand than it is going to take to sew on your sewing machine. So that is where we're going with this. So in the next videos, I'm going to talk through details for all the parts that I recommend. But of course, if you want to go ahead and do it a different way than I'm recommending, there are lots of other tutorials available. So you can feel free to make your own decisions, but this is what I really recommend for a first project. So if you have any questions about any of those, or you just want to let me know what you're doing, then drop a note in the comments. And I'm really interested to hear how your quilt top turned out, what size you ended up making, and how you think you're going to finish that into a quilt. So you can be watching the playlist for more details about finishing your quilt. And for more quilting tutorials, patterns, and inspiration, you can check out my website, epidastudio.com.